Hi and welcome, everybody. I see we have a few people subscribed and going to be joining us here. And you are with Purpose and Profit. I'm Michelle Vandepass, your host. And today my guest is Amanda Abuela. I don't think I said that correctly, Abella, who is going to tell us all about how we market to millennials and what's different about marketing to millennials and what we need to know and what you need to know. And it's so great to have you on the show. And it's your first blab.
It's my first blab ever. Thank you for having me. This thing is awesome. This is so cool.
Isn't this cool? So I'm going to lock the seats because we're not going to take other guests or callers on this. You and I are just going to talk. But if people want to reach you later, they can go to amandaabella.com to find out more about you. And you have an Amazon book and so forth. So let's just start. You have made a career of specializing in millennials. Tell me first, just so that we're on the same page, what age range are millennials?
Oh my gosh, that depends on who you ask. It's a pretty wide range, but they're going to say that the older millennials are starting to hit the 35 range around now. So okay. I would be kind of somewhere in the middle, and then maybe the ones coming out of school now would be like the end of it, you know?
Okay. And so what's different about millennials? Why are you focusing there?
Well, with my personal story, I came of age. I graduated from college in 2010. Pretty bad in 2010. I went about 6 months without a job, any sort of employment whatsoever, found entrepreneurship as a result. And at the time, there was just a lot of news articles just kind of about how screwed we were as a generation. You know, there was a lot of you're entitled, you can't find jobs, you're lazy, you're moving back home, you're in debt. You people are doing nothing with your lives. There was a whole lot of that. And I guess because I was living it, I'm like, no, I'm not just a statistic. I'm not like this entitled millennial. I literally can't find a job. Like there's 13% unemployment in my hometown right now. So I realized that there were just certain issues that were affecting my generation that was going to affect us for the rest of our lives. I didn't know at the time that that's what I had done, right? I was just connecting the dots, you know, and putting one foot in front of the other and trying to figure stuff out. And now a few years later, we realize that millennials are extremely entrepreneurial. We're one of the most entrepreneurial generations to date. I believe it was the Young Entrepreneurship Council said how 1 in 3 millennials either already have a full-time business or are, you know, have a business on the side. 1 in 3. The other
wow.
Yeah, 1 in 3. And that was a 2012 statistics, and I'm sure it's only gone up since then. The other thing that's happening is we are throwing companies for a loop with how we are spending our money. Like companies don't even know what to do with us because they don't know how to talk to millennials. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of different conversations. All these marketing and business tactics that people used before aren't necessarily relating to the millennial generation.
All right, so let's break it down a little bit. You're an entrepreneur. Did you ever get a job? Let's start there.
Yes, I did. My first job out of college, I was teaching English and Spanish for International Corporation and International Language School. And then I worked as a recruiter for 2 years where I interviewed people for jobs and we would place them within Fortune 500 companies.
But so what made you want to ditch all that after it took you so long to find a job and go into entrepreneurship? Just take me through that process.
A big part of it was that when I worked in recruiting, I would interview people who had lost their jobs from 1 week to the next. All their income gone. That's tough, right? And I was like, I don't want to be one of these people.
Okay.
And I realized that the only way I was going to avoid being in that situation was if I got serious about running a business and freelancing and creating multiple streams of income. Because, I mean, it's terrible to be in that kind of a situation. And now as an entrepreneur, you know, we may lose a client. We may lose a project. Something may end. But I haven't lost all my income from 1 month to the next.
Right. Okay, so you got a job. Then you decided, because you were seeing what was happening in the marketplace, you moved over to being being an entrepreneur. How did you choose to focus on millennials? Because you are one? Is that the obvious answer?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So you understood the market. Yeah, I mean, that's the number one rule of entrepreneurship probably is understand your market.
Yeah, and I'd been blogging and talking about these things online on my own, and I had started a blog at the time. It was called Grad Meets World, and it was really just to dig myself out of a hole, right? It was really for me to learn about budgeting and being an adult in the economy and just how to manage in this completely new world of work where the rules that my parents had didn't apply to me.
So tell me about that. So let's stop there. What do you mean the rules? Like I'm old enough to be your parent. It seems like my rules should apply to you. What doesn't apply?
Well, for example, my parents did not graduate with the amount of debt that people are graduating into now. It is absurd. 2015, the average student loan debt was around $32,000.
Wow.
Imagine graduating. You haven't even started yet, and you're already $30,000 behind the eight ball. That is crazy.
It's crazy.
It's insane. So that's number one. Number two, like I said, at least in my situation, I came of age. I couldn't even find a job. My mom had a job with the company she worked with for the next 35 years before she'd even finished graduating.
Yeah. Wow.
The other thing is you have companies doing more with less people. There's changes going on in healthcare. The whole systems that were around for our parents are just like completely shifting and changing all around us.
Okay.
So this generation basically has had to learn, okay, how am I going to make money when I'm already behind the eight ball? How am I going to make money when my values are different than, this is actually something I hear a lot. I'm working with a consulting client right now. I'm teaching him how to brand himself online. And he's about 30 and he works in the construction industry in Texas. And he's saying this friction, right, between the older generations of management, right, and the younger professionals. The younger professionals want to move up fast. So they want to start their own businesses. They value flexibility. They want people to come up to them and have a conversation where, and they are very ambitious. Whereas this particular client fits into that perspective. He's like, oh, I'm going to be a CEO in like 7 years. I already know it. But his boss is telling him, you're going to be at your current job for the next 10 years before that happens.
Okay, so I want to talk about this for a minute because I think this is exactly the place where millennials are misunderstood. And I've had other conversations around these same topics because as you started this conversation, it seems like, oh, millennials are lazy. They don't want to work, right? But here you are telling me they do want to work, but it sounds like they want more say, more control. They know what it is they want. And what it sounds like is they're like I would call it on purpose. Yeah. This is a purpose show, right?
Yeah.
They're on purpose. They're not just like waiting around for their bosses to tell them how they're going to do their life.
Yeah, no, they hate that.
And they're going after it, right? So that's a value difference from some older generations who are looking to their bosses to help mentor and shape careers.
Yeah, and I think a part of that may be, remember, this is a generation that came of age when the markets tanked, right? So if you were to tell a millennial, hey, you're going to have the same job for the next 30 years, they'd look at you and laugh in your face, because they're like, oh, really? That worked out real well for my parents.
Right.
So there's that going on too. It has a lot to do with just the time period that we're in. Millennials actually have been compared very much to the generation that came of age during the Great Depression. Even some of our financial habits are very similar to the generation that came of age during the Great Depression. It's really interesting to see how history repeats itself that way. It's just now we have technology.
And Chuck, who's here on Blab, is saying it's the second industrial revolution. It's a completely different paradigm. Here's a question. One of the things that seem to me that are coming back around are things like simplicity, tiny house movement, being flexible, growing your own food, even if you're growing your own food in the middle of a city in a window box, right? Yeah. Going back to simple food, conversation, and yet the outside world seems to think millennials are not wanting connection. They're on their devices all the time. They're lazy and spoiled and want too much stuff. But it seems like the reality of what's going on is totally opposite to that. Why is there such a disconnect with how I'm seeing millennials and what you're describing and what other people are describing?
I think a part of it may just be like, this happens every time there's a new generation. I'm sure in 10 years, like, we're going to be talking about how Gen Z is terrible and how and like, you know what I mean? I think that's a part of it. But I also think it's like this person said, like, we're going through a complete paradigm shift. Mm-hmm. And the millennials, I think, have just kind of realized, because they have had to live it, right? They have just kind of realized at a very young age that things are not as they were before. That millennials have realized at a young age that we have some very specific challenges, and we also have some very specific goals, and we have a different value system. So, for example, with a lot of employers, you go around asking millennial employees what it is that they value. It's not necessarily a higher paycheck, it's flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Why is that, do you think?
Well, again, it's a paradigm shift. Millennials grew up in an age of technology. So for me, for example, going to work for myself, a lot of it was about freedom. As long as I have a laptop, I can work from wherever. I can get on a plane next week if I wanted to. It's not going to affect my work schedule. Mm-hmm. Or I can rearrange things. Like if my family needs me to do something, I can easily rearrange things so I can be there for my family. Mm-hmm. And I feel like millennials, perhaps because and I will say this, I saw this growing up. We saw how our parents did not have that same flexibility, right? It was very like 40, 50, 60-hour work weeks and then fit your life into the rest of the time that you have. And millennials are just kind of like, whoa, 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 whoa. That doesn't work. That's not going to fly for us. That's not even realistic. Mm-hmm. So millennials kind of value that flexibility. For millennials, it's a lot of how to integrate work and life together, not necessarily having them as separate areas.
And is that working?
It's working for me.
Well, that's the right answer, right? And you'll help it work for other people too, right?
I mean, there's been a major shift. I think it was, and this may not necessarily be pertinent to millennials, but I know millennials are at the forefront of this movement. I think it was a few months ago, MSN Money published an article that said, oh, the 9-to-5 job is dying. And they were saying how more people, I mean, we have more self-employed people in this country than ever before. And it's getting larger and larger and larger and larger with each coming year. A lot of that has to do with technology. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we have this shift in a paradigm, A lot of it has to do with the fact that our values are different. So we're going to find a way to live the way we want to live. So there's a lot of different things going on here. There's a lot of different factors at play. And I think companies, especially the more traditional companies that have been around forever, just kind of don't know what to do with us as a result.
Yeah, I've heard that there are some companies that won't really hire people under 35 right now. I've heard that. So, yeah. And Chuck made a joke that the 9-to-5 is dead. So thank you for the comments, Chuck. I'm watching them. So let me ask you, because this is purpose and profit. And when you come out of college with so much debt and you want flexibility, are there jobs out there? Let's say you don't want to be entrepreneurial. You do want team. You want to go in and work on a team and be part of something bigger, right? Because it's just a different paradigm for some people. Is it possible to have that? Do you see some companies changing?
Yeah, I mean, my recruiter answer as a former recruiter would be yes. However, you really have to go and look for it. Companies, this is going to take a while before companies really catch up to what is going on, especially in older industries. There's a really great book by Julie Clow, I believe, called The Work Revolution. And she talks about how the newer companies like Google and Netflix and Zappos and all those guys, they're on it. They're on point. They get it, right? And they're changing very quickly to deal with this new generation and this new paradigm that we're seeing in the workplace. But the ones who've been around a lot longer, and my background is in finance, right? So I often hear financial planners who work for the big, giant financial planning companies and the big firms, how they're like practically prehistoric with the way that they do things. And it
Sure.
takes a long time in order for them to change, and they're very resistant to it. And that's another industry that doesn't understand millennials at all. Some companies do, right? But the financial industry and the real estate industry, I mean, we're just throwing them for a loop.
And so what do you do if you're running a financial company to help bring millennials in? Because I think to say, oh, I'm not going to hire anybody under 35 works for a short time, but eventually you run out of workforce. And I think you do have to keep up with the times a little bit. So what can companies do to attract millennials? What do they need to do?
There's a lot. I think, like I said, when you ask millennials what they want mainly, it's flexibility. So telecommuting and all those kinds of things. Some companies need to stop being so resistant to that. It's just the way that we do work now, and it's fine. It's okay. Plenty of people telecommute and they get their work done just fine, right? I think we're also seeing some shifts. I believe it was Netflix and Microsoft who did this recently, where they're extending family leave for people, and they're extending maternity leave for people, and they're allowing it for men too. It's not just women. Men can also get paternal leave, so that they can go help take care of their kids if they need to. So we're starting to see some shifts like that, and it's shifts that a lot of these things seem like no-brainers, right? Like how have we not figured out paternity leave? This is like a fact of life. This is a reality that we need to deal with. How have companies not figured this out yet? And now we're starting to see those changes. So there are companies who are catering to the flexibility. Another trend that we're seeing, and this happens more in like the tech startup industry, right? You've probably heard the statistics that millennials are like changing their jobs every 2 years.
Right.
It's because they can go make more money somewhere else.
So money, because earlier you said money isn't necessarily the most important thing, but it is still part of it.
Money is not the most important thing. Flexibility is, but money definitely plays a role in it, you know,
Right.
and anybody would agree with this, any generation. You're not going to want to be underpaid for the work that you do.
Right.
You know, and this generation, again, you know, they've just had to deal with underemployment. They've had to deal with student loans. They've had very specific financial challenges where they're like, hey, I'm not playing with my money. You know, this isn't a joke to me. I have serious obligations that I need to deal with.
Right. And big debt.
And
right.
big debt, you know, so they are going after the money. And if you're I saw this all the time as a recruiter, where they would come and they would be so frustrated because they'd been at the same company for like 2 years. They weren't getting a raise. The wages were stagnant. So now one of the things that you're seeing in the career space, right, is that people are quitting their job every couple of years and they're negotiating a higher salary when they start with the next job.
Right, right. Yeah.
So we're seeing,
because that's how they get there. And yet I forgot what the statistic is, but it's like double your current salary to replace you. So if you quit, I'm going to have to pay double just in the training and recruiting and
right. So one of the things that people are saying is like, are you going to wait around 2 years for them to maybe give you a 3% raise, or are you going to leverage that experience and get yourself a 10% raise when you go to a new job?
Right.
So there's that going on as well. And actually, it's very interesting that you bring this up, because a couple of weeks ago, I was visiting my old place of employment. And this is a business that's been around, I think, almost 50 years, right? And they're at a stage now where they're like, oh my gosh, people have LinkedIn now. Like, it's not like it was before. You know, these young kids are coming in, they're learning how to interview, they're learning how to do all this stuff, and then they're just going to go contact the recruiter themselves on LinkedIn.
Right.
You know, so there are all these or on other forms of social media. People get jobs on Twitter all the time.
Right.
So you have this generation, right, that they value flexibility. Money is still important because it's a reality that they have to deal with and they understand it. And that's probably one of the reasons why so many millennials have an extra form of income in the form of a side business, or are so attracted to entrepreneurship. And the third thing is that millennials are very socially conscious, right? So this is where the purpose comes in. Millennials like to feel like they are contributing to a greater purpose. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is huge for this generation.
Yeah,
it's not just a matter of clocking in and clocking out. They want to know that they're making a difference.
Absolutely. And we need that. Oh my gosh, do we need that right now? So how do we market differently to millennials? Like I'm out there marketing packages. Do I need to change my sales copy? Does it need to be short and sweet? Is it better on Twitter? Tell me some tips.
Well, I'm just going to tell you from my personal experience is if you kind of get on their level with the language, right? So I know very specifically what the language of my market is. My market is millennials. That's primarily who I do brand consulting for, right? I know exactly what they're thinking. I know exactly how they speak. I know exactly what it is that they value. In my business, for example, I know a lot of what attracts millennials to me, right, is the fact that I do all of my work from a laptop, and I'm making more money doing that than I did sitting in an office. And I get to have fun and I get to travel. So it's almost like a lifestyle thing, you know, like my life and my business represents what they want.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So my personal experience, that's a part of it.
So in marketing, it's about talking about lifestyles, talking about purpose, making a difference, flexibility. All of those would be sort of buzzwords, if you would, to put in sales copy to attract the attention.
Another thing that's very important, and this is something that sometimes people are resistant to, and I've also done brand consulting for non-millennials, right? And they tend to struggle with this a little bit more than the millennials do, but show more of yourself and your own personality. If you're a goofball, be a goofball. You don't have to like be very like, you know, with the suit and tie and very proper and formal. Millennials hate that, right? Because that to them, it's almost like it represents the establishment that got them into these problems to begin with, right? Uh-huh. So they're very resistant to that. They want people to just be laid back and real and flexible and just be authentic and show that personality and not be afraid to show it. I mean, if you look at some of the Twitter accounts of some of the most popular CEOs in the country, they'll like put jokes on Twitter and stuff, or they'll show pictures of a weekend out with their family. Like it's not all about work. It's not all about trying to sell them something. They really show a lot of themselves to their market. And the very interesting thing about that is you're right. You know, we're always on our phones. We're always on a computer. There's so much technology that it's almost like that's how we crave human connection now. You know, if you want to see who you really are.
It really, to me, seems a lifestyle and a cultural shift. And the millennials seem to be the ones that are driving the shift. But there are plenty of CEOs who are not buttoned up.
Yeah,
right.
A ton of them
that are older.
Yeah,
that may not fit the millennial age. There are lots of people doing really fantastic work in their 60s and 70s. I'm not quite that old, but I'm getting up there, and I work remotely a lot, right? I'm sitting at my office today, but I work remotely a lot. So I think it's a consciousness shift. It's a cultural shift that bleeds out into many generations.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But it's a mindset that you have to get around, like almost, do you want to be left behind? Mm-hmm. And some people are so let me not put it quite like that, because not being on technology is not a bad thing, but there's a different mind shift that goes with, I guess, all our parents, all as children, we always look to our parents as, oh, you're so old fashioned. Mm-hmm. And so I think you have to keep up with the times, not to be left behind in technology, but just in the mind shift and the consciousness and the cultural shifts that are happening.
Yeah. And actually technology is it's not the end all be all, but it is pretty important to a millennial. And speaking of the financial industry, I actually recently wrote an article for a website called investmentzen.com. And they asked me to do a review on a financial company called Betterment. For those of you who are not in the financial industry, Betterment is it's what is in the industry is called a robo-advisor, right? So instead of hiring a financial advisor to help you with your investments, what Betterment does is that it automates the whole process for you, right? Millennials love them, and they market to millennials and young investors. And in this review, I basically wrote, I moved almost all of my investments to this company because I had the whole thing set up in 5 minutes. and it was easy to figure out. They're doing the asset allocation for me. They're doing the tax loss harvesting for me. All the stuff that would cost me an arm and a leg if I were to hire a financial advisor. And perhaps a financial advisor, unfortunately, financial advisors know that a lot of the money is with the older generations and not necessarily the millennials. So a financial advisor may not even take a millennial on as a client because they don't have enough assets, right? They don't have enough to manage, right? So Betterment saw this need in the market, saw this need for young investors, and saw that young investors were not getting what they needed, right? So they created a platform where basically the whole thing is run on technology. It's very automated and it's very easy to use. So I don't have to worry about, oh, okay, am I doing the right asset allocation? No, because they're doing it automatically for me. I remember in that same article, I talked about how I was with another financial company, one of the older ones, earlier this year, and how I go onto the website and I couldn't even find where I was supposed to set up like an automatic deposit from my checking into the investment account. Whereas with Betterment, like I said, I had it all set up in 5 minutes. It's done. It's taken care of.
There is something, you got to be on it, and you got to be on it in the apps and on the phones. And, having an old website that isn't mobile friendly, if you can't click the phone number from your phone, it's all over. You're not going to get the phone calls, right? You do have to keep up from that perspective, because so many of us are just doing it on our phone at the red light or whatever.
Exactly. So there is something to be said for technology. Again, I don't think it's the end all be all. Right. I don't think that if you're not, you don't have to have everything automated like Betterment does. It's not anything like that. But to pay attention to those things. And really, at the end of the day, when it comes to the technology, what millennials like is the fact that it's easy and that it's fast.
Mm-hmm.
That's
I get customer service on Twitter all the time, right? If I need help, I just reach out on Twitter. And if it's a with it company, I get an answer pretty quickly.
A lot of companies use Twitter for customer service.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
It's fast. It's fast. So we've got just a couple of minutes here left. Let's give out your website again. It's amandaabella.com.
Mm-hmm.
People can hire you for branding. Also, you have a book about money.
Yeah, Make Money Your Honey, a spirited entrepreneur's guide to having a love affair with work and money. And that came about because people, my millennial audience asked for it. They're like, oh my gosh, please help us. In this new world of work, we know things have completely changed and we need to make money. How do we do it? So that's what I do in that book.
Nice.
I lay out how to do it.
Good. So leave us with just a tip about what a millennial can do to really start this entrepreneurial journey, either as their main income or as another stream of income. What are some things that they need to do to get started?
I think the main thing to do to get started, and this is what helped me in the very beginning, is find people who are doing what you want to do. Not necessarily to copy them, right? But if you're really at a beginning stage where you're not even sure yet, right, if this is even a path you want to take, find people who are doing what you want to be doing. Take notes, follow them, pay attention, see how it is that they're marketing, see how it is that they make their money, and kind of dip your foot in that way. Right? Before you start spending all this money on websites and trying to build a business and all that kind of stuff, first you just kind of find some examples. And I think the reason I say that is because it's so easy to feel like you're never going to make it. You're never going to be able to do it. It's so hard out there. And by finding these examples, right, you kind of start training yourself like, hey, tons of people are doing this. This is totally doable.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Thanks so much. Do you have a few minutes to stay? I'm going to stop recording, but if you have a couple of minutes, we'll take questions.
Sure, absolutely.
All right. So again, thank you for joining me on Purpose and Profit. My guest today was Amanda Abella, talking all about millennials, how to market to them, what they're looking for, and where she thinks the workforce is going. I appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks for having me again, and I'm looking forward